Hello, happy Friday, everybody. It's good to see everyone here today. Thank you. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Thank you all so much for dropping in here to spend our Friday afternoon quickly going over these news events for the week. And I will warn you that the spaces have been a little weird lately. So, in case we get cut off from this call and I have to restart, just wait. I will put something out there immediately so we can continue, and there might be some issues with the mic. So please bear with us, and I appreciate everybody's patience while we deal with wonky Twitter. But we have, our panel here today. I have my all stars that are helping out to run this space because it's just so much to talk about. So we have Taylor, thank you so much. Linus, Ekenstam, Matt, Wolf, Bilawal Sidhu will be joining us shortly, and we're going to just try to get through a lot of these conversations and the biggest news. We're going to go through the things first. And just to ask everybody, please use the emojis in the corner of your screen. If you're on your phone, you'll see the little heart with a plus. Hit the heart and let us know how everything is going. I see emojis going off. Thank you so much. So we'll know if it's resonating or if there's any issues. Please feel free to add to the chat. Everybody, you can do shameless plugs, put whatever you want in there so we can share information, because we often can't cover everything. So you can go ahead and put your information in there and talk about what's going on out in this space. Share it with your friends if you want to send out the link and let them know what we're talking about. A lot of people, there's so much going on, they might not be aware that we're having this space right now. But I appreciate everybody coming, and we just have so many little things to cover. We're gonna try to see what we can get through today. And I would like to ask people that when we have the mics again, we have a limited number of mics once we have a bunch of people. So we'll have to pull some occasionally for different subjects and give them to other people. We'll try to get everybody to the mic as often as we can. And we'll hold off for questions until we go over the bulk of the information. But we can go ahead and get started. And Billawall is not on here right now. So I was thinking, Matt, you have a rundown of what's been going on based on the things that you've been posting. You've been putting all these videos on YouTube every day, and it's just wild how many different topics you've covered. But did you want to start us off?
Sure, yeah. So it's been some interesting couple of weeks. A lot has happened. Just to kind of give the lay of the land, this isn't everything we're going to be talking about today. I know we probably shouldn't talk about most of this, but earlier this week, Google launched Bard. Well, they didn't really launch it, but they started rolling out access to Bard. So we have that. Adobe started launching Firefly, which is their sort of generative art platform. NVIDIA did a big keynote, and one of the big things that came out of that keynote is NVIDIA Foundations, where they're going to start allowing people to create their own private large language models on their GPUs and their servers. Bing just added improved DALL-E into their system, so it's a sort of advanced, newer version of DALL-E that actually looks pretty impressive. Opera added ChatGPT and Write Sonic to their browser. Microsoft announced Loop, which is sort of their AI-enabled version of Notion. It kind of looks just like Notion, but with their AI built into it. Canva basically put every AI imaginable into their platform in their big announcement yesterday. GitHub announced Copilot X, which uses GPT-4 to help coders use natural language to improve their code. Ubisoft announced a tool to create AI dialogue in their games. Unreal Engine showed off the new MetaHuman animator, which can create animations just using iPhone videos. And then probably the biggest news of the week that I have on my list is that ChatGPT added plugins into the platform, and they're starting to roll that out, which, similar to something like WordPress, really extends the functionality of what we can do with ChatGPT. It's going to be web enabled. You're going to be able to use your own CSVs, your own video files, your own images directly inside of ChatGPT and edit them with, natural language in ChatGPT. So the news of the plugins rolling into ChatGPT, I would imagine, will probably be one of the biggest topics that we can discuss, because the implications of this are just massive. But I'm probably even missing some of this stuff. And that list that I just gave you is what I came across in a nutshell this week. I'm sure Billawal and Linus will have some additional things that I didn't even mention there. But yeah, after last week, which was crazy enough, we got another week of just nonstop announcement after announcement after announcement. And earlier today, Robert Scoble was sharing a tweet with me from Microsoft saying that the people at Microsoft are claiming that next week's not going to be any slower. So, yeah, that's what we're in for right now.
Jesus Christ. Can we just I think you covered the superset on my list, Matt. So I'm going to learn about some stuff that I didn't even have time to follow. So holy crap. I wonder if the pace will slow down or if it'll just be like this for, I don't know. We can't possibly keep this pace up, right? Like this has to stop at some point.
I mean, I feel that Apple and Meta have been fairly quiet lately, so I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, oh, nice, yeah, WWDC is coming. Let's see. Actually, Scoble's predictions for this WWDC will be interesting. So, yeah, I guess you're right. At least till the summer. And maybe there's, I don't know, maybe this is just naivete on my part. Let's just go full blaze ahead. And all systems go to 11.
I think like for a nice segue there on Apple, on my end, I think like I'm pretty bullish on what's going to happen on Apple, and I wrote a little note about that the other night and published it yesterday, and that sort of resonated with a lot of people. So yeah, I'm very bullish on what's going to happen in that space. But yeah, I don't have much to add to that list, Matt. Like it's an amazing list. I think we're just going to have to churn through it and go item by item.
Well, I think personally the biggest news to come out of the week is the ChatGPT stuff. So I don't know if that's a good place to start for everybody, but that to me is just that's the biggest game changer that came out of this week. If I'm being totally honest, I look at Adobe Firefly. I mean, it's a better user interface than what we've seen from tools like Stable Diffusion, where Automatic 1111 could be a little bit overwhelming if you're using that. If you're using Midjourney, we're sort of forced to use it inside of Discord right now. So I think the biggest thing that Adobe's bringing to the table with Firefly is really just the user interface. A lot of the other stuff we've already kind of been able to do with Stable Diffusion, even the texture that you could put over the text, we were already kind of able to do that using things like ControlNet. So, I don't really feel like it's cool because of the user interface, right? And then you've got Bard, which came out this week. And I spent some time playing with Bard, and personally, it was pretty underwhelming. I even asked Bard, what is the benefits of using Bard over Bing chat? And Bard literally said in its response to me that Bing chat's going to give you better answers, and it's got a better user interface, and it's got a better user experience. I would probably use Bing chat. So when I asked Bard the benefits of using Bard, it told me to go use Bing chat. Right. So, Bard was fairly unimpressive when I used it. It is web connected. I asked it to summarize a website for me, and it got some of it right and then just hallucinated the rest. It just made up stuff that wasn't even in the article that I gave it. So Bard was fairly unimpressive. So yes, there was a lot of announcements this week, but I feel like most of them have been fairly underwhelming compared to the ChatGPT plugin announcement and the wave of announcements we got last week from things like Midjourney version 5 and GPT-4. And I mean, doesn't it already feel like GPT-4 has been out for like a month just with the pace of everything that's been happening? It feels like so long ago that it came out.
I just want to jump in really quick and say that I love coming to these spaces because I feel like I'm just in a room of really smart tech brains. And so I really appreciate it. I come here, I go and report back to my community and people and say like, okay, here's what this means for us as creators. So I want to know, and maybe Matt, maybe you can help explain this, but you mentioned ChatGPT plugins. I'm here. I'm totally here for the Canva news, by the way, but I don't know a whole lot about some of these other ones. So when it comes to the ChatGPT plugins, like what does that mean? I've heard a lot of chatter about why it's such a big deal, but is it really on like the developer end of it because it gives developers the ability to create these plugins, I guess, with ChatGPT? Or I don't know, like I'm just trying to wrap my brain around it and think like, what does this mean for me right now?
Yeah, I'll jump in and start this off, but I think Linus or Billawall or even AP, some of them might have some better responses to this question. But some of the stuff that is going to be rolling out with the plugins early on is one of them is a browser plugin that OpenAI is making, which basically just makes ChatGPT internet connected. So you can ask it questions and it will search the internet for you and give you responses based on what it finds on the web. So that immediately makes it like the Bing chat or Bard or one of those types of tools where it's now web connected and it searches the internet for you. It's got it's going to have a plugin. I can't remember what they call the plugin. Somebody else here can help me out with it, but there's a plugin where you can upload your own CSV files and have it interpret the data in the CSV files. You can upload JPEGs or PNG files and have it actually tell you what's in the PNG file and then alter it. You can have it resize it. You can have it change the color. You can have it remove the background. It'll let you upload a video. And when you upload the video, you can say, cut out a clip of the video, and it will just process it all in the background for you. So that's stuff that I believe OpenAI, those are just plugins that OpenAI developed and are building into it. And then there's also third-party plugins, which in the beginning rollout, companies like Zapier, Kayak, Instacart, all sorts of companies already have third-party plugins that they've built on top of it, where you'll be able to go in there and say, let's say, for instance, you use Zapier to connect ChatGPT to your Gmail. Ben Tossell did a really good video breakdown of him connecting Gmail to ChatGPT, and he was able to say, go find the last email from this person. It went and found that email, and then he said, craft up a response to this email for me. And then ChatGPT wrote an email and sent it using the connection between ChatGPT and Gmail. Right, so that's another example. Another video example that OpenAI put out was the example of it integrated directly with Instacart, where they said, I want a recipe for this food. It gave them the recipe, and then they said, all right, order those items for me. And then it put all those items in a shopping cart in Instacart, and then they were able to press one button and have those items delivered to them. So the implications of plugins in ChatGPT, I don't think we even realize how big they are yet, because it just opened up the ability for anybody to create new cool shit on top of ChatGPT, right? So that's really what it is developers can now build on top of it. And the implications to all of these other AI businesses that are out there are also huge. Like, this is going to be another huge disruption to companies that do things like, we enable ChatGPT for the web, right? There's a ton of Chrome extensions that have already done that. Well, now those Chrome extensions are going to be obsolete once this fully rolls out, right? There's all sorts of tools that are trying to connect via API GPT-3 with things like Zapier. Well, all of those are going to be obsolete because now you're just going to be able to do it inside of ChatGPT. So, that's my sort of rant on it. But I know Linus and Billawall and AP, you guys are all in the mix too. So if one of you want to jump in and even further describe some of the implications, I would love to hear it.
I think you crushed it, man. Like, to build on what you said, it's there's been a meme going around with OpenAI stuff, right? So I pinned this tweet up top that I think is really crystallizing this in a nice way. It's like, the meme was, hey, like, most AI startups today are essentially wrappers around like some OpenAI API, right? Or add in the Google API, the NVIDIA API, whatever. But that's like taking these foundational models. Like, another analogy that's been made is these foundational models themselves are sort of like the App Store. So when the smartphone happened, obviously, like, you had the iOS and Android app stores that sort of served as this way to deploy applications and also connect them with a user base, an audience that wants to use those applications on their own devices, right? Contrast this with sort of the Windows era, where there wasn't really a centralized sort of distribution mechanism like an app store for a very long time, and you had to remember, kids, you had to go buy a freaking box with a CD in it back in the day. That's how distribution happened. So app stores have happened. And even in this last wave of just OpenAI opening up GPT-3 and then ChatGPT itself, there's certainly a case to be made if you've got a standalone app that's very interesting, or maybe you're building a net new experience. It's very interesting to be able to integrate GPT into that. But what if you just want to meet users where they are, which right now happens to be ChatGPT? which is funny in itself, is something that like OpenAI just built because nobody else built this sort of like chat interface. So if you're in ChatGPT, having these plugins allows you to get a lot more done in one app, in one context, in one session. So what do I mean by that? If you want to, let's say there's a plugin integration for maps. I want to go figure out what are some like awesome restaurants to go to. Maybe you're doing trip planning or whatever. Then there's another integration for hotels booking, right? Like I think they had Kayak as one of the plugin partners. You can go do your booking there too. And then third, like let's say you want to go plan an itinerary for fun activities to do later, you could do that too, or ask it like what are great spots to go, take photos with my friends or take selfies with my friends. This is me pretending to be Gen Z, by the way. You can do all of that in one context, not having to jump around multiple apps. And so, like, that's just like a travel use case, right? The one that blew my mind was the alternative to FFmpeg, right? Like, so if like you want to do random video editing tasks, right? Like, I want to snip the first second of this video, I want to transcode it, grab some frames from it. You can use a plugin to do that. So imagine you're trying to make your like, Matt's in the past talked about, essentially the process, the multi-hour process to go make a thumbnail. Let's say you've got a video ready to go. Now, all the stuff you want to do from like ideation of the thumbnail concept itself, you've got a DALL-E plugin, let's say, so you're doing the image generation right there too. You want to go have like multimodal GPT, then go look at those things and pick the best one or something like that based on certain criteria you provide, down to like finalizing the metadata and compressing the video itself. You can start doing all these tasks sort of in one context. So I think like that's super powerful, and it almost makes it like the analogy in the tweet that I pinned is like GPT turns into the OS, if you will. But instead of even in iOS, you're jumping between these apps. The fact that you can do all these tasks with plugins in one context without losing that thread, I think is going to be exceedingly powerful. So I'm super excited just to wrap this up and say like, it's going to be exciting to see where this goes because we're at this phase of like early stage app stores too, where it was like the freaking, fart app or random touch games. And what's like the Uber going to look like? These like, what are the unicorns that are going to emerge that could effectively just be freaking plugins in an interface like ChatGPT? So those are some of the things I'm excited about. Linus, you've also spoken about this and thought about this extensively. I'm kind of curious what you have to add to the mix.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's going to be hard to add any valuable thing after Matt and you, Bill, while on this one. But I think what I like to just point out, I think like I've tried it, so it's quite clunky at this point in time. You have to like enable a plugin for each individual conversation that you start, and I think what we're seeing is kind of the precursors to what's going to happen next. I think this is they're shipping like an indie developer. I like this. I mean, kudos, they have probably had this in the pipeline for some time, but it's like definitely nowhere near like a full solution in terms of the UX. Um, but I can see how these kind of will fade into the background as it continues to kind of grow and expand in capabilities. Because like no way that I'm gonna go and manually turn on each individual plugin for each conversation that I'm gonna have with the chatbot. That's just too tedious. But if this is kind of like the beginning of the end, where it is becoming like an app store and everything that you want to have available with inside of ChatGPT, if that's your choice of interface, um, then it's very interesting. I can imagine like on my account level that I have certain things turned on, and then whenever I start a conversation or I'm in an existing conversation, I'll either use some sort of slash command or like some sort of like GUI component to just like let it know what I'm looking for, and that will be the start. But then ultimately in the end, I hope they go to like just having it naturally be there, so I don't really have to turn anything on and off. I just give it a task, and it figures out that for this task I should use X, and then use X and complete the task for me. um, I'm very excited about this. Obviously, like I think it opens up even more use cases than what we've seen before with people like building on top of the APIs, because like that's one kind of subset of developers that are able to use the APIs and bring value and kind of build on top of that. I think this is kind of like more akin to almost like a no code or low code situation where you only focus on like the value add that you want to bring to the chatbot, and then that's kind of it. So I think we're going to see a lot more things going to be built on top of this, and the barrier to entry seems to just get lower and lower in terms of adding good value on top of an already great value. So I think that's my 2 cents on this. But yeah, that's it. Let's move on.
I will say we have one hand up. Folks want to comment. So, like last time, we said if you want to come to the stage, please keep it on track with the topic we're discussing. We're trying to thread these voice conversations as much as possible. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, Taylor, you want to chime in here as I let up Crow?
Yeah. No, last thing that I'll add on the topic of the ChatGPT plugins is I saw something that I think maybe Matt retweeted from Mitchell Hashimoto about how the back end of the plugin system is just pretty wild, because you can actually write using like language descriptions for everything, and then you let the model just sort of figure out how to like authorize it and chain calls and process data, format it for viewing and things like that. Obviously I don't have the tech brain for that, but like has anyone experienced that?
Yeah, Crow, do you want to?
Complete
Yeah, Linus,
silence.
do you want to take this, or Crow? Feel free to jump in.
I haven't started doing anything with the plugins in terms of like actually building for it yet. I got access this morning to use it, so that's where I'm at right now. But I'm excited to hear if anyone in the audience, like, raise your hand if you tried it already.
Because I guess because it kind of would like democratize that process a little bit. Like it could make anyone able to build a plugin for that. Or I don't know if that's the right assumption, but that's what it sounds like. Like I could
it definitely
possibly
lowers the barrier, right? Because I think it takes it's kind of like if you've seen Amar is not in here today, but Amar managed to build quite some interesting things without knowing how to code, essentially. And I think that's the same thing that's going to happen here. Is you're going to mix your files is going to be a mix of like natural language and code, and this is super interesting. I think another thing I mentioned yesterday in my thread in my notes is that we're going to see a whole slew of kind of like instant use apps, or like self-destructing apps that are like single use. Like you want to do a specific task, but there's no software for that because there's just not enough market for it, but you have a task that requires you to do something. GPT, whatever, 4.5 will build that for you and dispose of it in its own runtime when it's done solving your problem. So I think this is something that's extremely interesting. We're kind of lacking like a full runtime environment yet, but like I think this is coming, and especially with plugins, we're seeing like the precursor of that happening. So for sure, anyone will be able to write plugins in the end, I think.
That description is wild, by the way. Self-destructing apps. I think like that is purpose-built software that's sort of dynamic. That's my head is like hurting just thinking through the implications of that. Yeah, Crow.
Yeah,
do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I on that topic, I feel like eventually we're not going coders will be a thing of the past. The new coding language will be whatever language you naturally speak, and the AI will do most of the rest of the work for you. Right now, I have a concept for a code editor that, let's say you would have like a window with code templates that you could upload different code templates for what you want to make. Let's say you're making an Uber like app. Okay, it would have a bunch of examples of code that's essentially the same thing as Uber in a bunch of different iterations, and you could narrow down exactly what you're doing with templates, tell it what you want, and it build it from scratch and lay it out in visual scripting, so you don't even have to know the code to alter what you got. Right? You just got to understand your interface. But on another topic, and it's very similar to what you guys are talking about, AGI is we're on the precipice of AGI. Like these people in these bigger companies already have it, and they're just releasing what they've had for 2 years to the rest of the people, all the pretty much everybody else, to keep the hype train up so they can keep working on it. Let's see, for example, we have Gato, which has been upgraded to Ada, which is very much AGI. Ada can learn a task in 15 minutes that most humans couldn't learn at all. Okay. We can apply something like that to something similar to Replica. with a needs-based state machine AI NPC. In no time, we have full-blown virtual humans in the virtual world. The advent of the metaverse, right? AR mixed reality glasses or headsets. Okay, the only thing missing there is an fMRI scan and a BCI, an external BCI, and now we can upload.
This virtual influencer concept is also interesting. It kind of builds on Linus's self-destructing app point too. It's like these applications that we interact will be at a higher level of abstraction, right? It's a chatbot today, but we're talking about multimodal and all these things. I don't know quite what you mean by we're on the precipice of AGI. I think that's like a religious debate that could totally derail this conversation. But your point about being able to create these sort of virtual influencers that'll sort of like be this, just like you talk to a person, you could talk to this thing. Like I keep thinking to, is there how soon are we going to have like a Zoom call with an AI, right? Like, or a FaceTime call with an AI, to do the exact same things that we talked about, earlier. It could get quite interesting.
Yeah, this is deep stuff. We should maybe save it for a bit later in the call, but I think we should touch on this later again. Entities and yeah, where they. I actually had 2 Zoom calls today where the third participant was someone's personal AI assistant, 2 in a row. I never had it like 2 in a row. I've seen it before, but like they are bringing assistants to one-on-ones. So let's see like when the assistant is also going to start adding things to the conversation, that could be pretty insane. Heather, I'm gonna allow you to host for a bit, and then we go to the next topic.
Oh
Probably.
no, thank you. I appreciate that. I just gave the mic to somebody and they disappeared. So not sure Pixel Girl if she was going to say something or not. And we're going to move on past the chat. We're going to move on past the plugins right now, right? So um everybody, thank you again for coming, and we appreciate everybody's patience while we go through a lot of these big topics, and we're going to try to get mics out as we can, but we're going to keep if you just remember, if you come up to the mic, we got to keep it limited and on topic so we can get through as many things as possible. Let me see where we're at right now, because I was looking around and I think we were talking about NVIDIA next, correct? What's going on? Who's taking that?
Yeah, Matt, do you want to set the stage on NVIDIA Foundation? I think that one's a broad one in itself. And then I think there's a really interesting conversation to be had there about sort of the services that they're launching almost seem to be going for Stability's business model.
Yeah, so NVIDIA, their GTC conference happened this week, where they were kind of rolling out all of their announcements and all of the big updates that were happening. And there was a lot that they talked about in the GTC conference, upgraded chips and new GPUs and all sorts of stuff. But the thing that really caught my eye, at least from the generative AI perspective, was the NVIDIA Foundations that they're doing. And what NVIDIA Foundations is essentially like cloud GPU computing. They're going to give companies access to their GPUs in the cloud so that they can essentially run their own proprietary large language models on them. So, for example, a company could go to them that's, let's say, a real estate company, and they need a very specific large language model built just for their real estate company with just their property listings and just their employees and just their agents, and they want to have a internal ChatGPT just for their business. NVIDIA Foundations is going to allow them to do that on their servers, on their GPUs. They're also going to have a model that's tailored towards generative art. So if you want to build your own version of like a Stable Diffusion or Midjourney, they're going to allow you to use their servers as well. And then they also have a third one for sort of biomedical stuff. So if you want to build your own biomedical large language model on NVIDIA's servers, that's another thing that NVIDIA Foundation is going to be able to help you with. Now, a lot of what they're doing, it's, I know the high level conceptual of what they're doing, but I can't really get into the weeds and explain it too much deeper than what I just gave you. But essentially, they're allowing companies to build their own large language models using their GPU, their compute power in the cloud. And so you can essentially train your own version of a ChatGPT that's proprietary to your company, your own version of a Stable Diffusion that's proprietary to your own company, or your own version of a biomedical large language model that's proprietary to your own company. That's the sort of high level of it, but I'm going to let AP take over because he's probably going to be able to explain it even better than that.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. How's it going, everybody? Hope you all are doing well today on this beautiful Friday. But yeah, so the NVIDIA thing is really interesting. So we talked a bit about Adobe. So Adobe actually is using NVIDIA's foundation model, and that's why they're claiming that they have like, the very clean data set, that it's like very creator friendly, as they say, although that's like, there's some arguments around that, but I won't get into it. But yeah, like essentially any organization, as long as they have like the data, if you think of the Getty Images is also one of their partners, Getty Images, Adobe, Shutterstock, they can then use NVIDIA's foundation model and then build like their own custom model that they can, then call on as like an API. So that like really competes against what Stable Diffusion's trying to do, because Stable Diffusion's trying to also do like foundation models for everybody, right? The principle of a foundation model is like you just have this thing that's really good at something, and then you like fine tune it using your own data. So yeah, really interesting things going on there. I think the result of this is you're gonna end up seeing, so Adobe's already came out with their thing, and then you're gonna see Getty Images probably come out with their image generator as well, and Shutterstock as well. How they handle that, like that's the little nuance that is to be determined, right? Like they do a lot of this talking of establishing a creator fund to give money back to the people that have had their data trained, right? Because Adobe, one of the thing is they're training their model based off of I think it's like the Adobe, I forget the name of it, but where they sell their images, the Adobe Marketplace images, right? They're training the model based on those images. So how are they going to be contributing back to those people that, brought that data for the data set? So those are all like conversations that you're probably going to see in the like near term future, medium term future. And also similarly, all these other companies are probably going to come out with their own diffusion model generators.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So it's Adobe stock that they're training it on. That's Adobe's, their stock photo selling service. So it's all trained on Adobe stock photos, and it's also trained on. Now we're kind of getting into Firefly, but it sort of overlaps with the NVIDIA conversation, obviously. But it's trained on that, and also all what's the word? I want to say open source, but not open source.
Creative Commons.
Creative Commons. It's trained on Creative Commons images. But what's interesting about the Adobe stock conversation is, like AP was saying, is they're trying to figure out a compensation model. So if you contributed images to Adobe stock and those images were used inside of the model, and somebody trains or creates an image, and somehow it used data from one of your images, somehow you're going to be compensated on that. I have no clue how that's going to work. I can't even wrap my head around how they're going to start to figure that out, but they're going to try to compensate people that contribute images to Adobe stock through the generative AI that use these trained images. So that's a whole interesting rabbit hole conversation that I don't know, maybe somebody here knows how that's going to work, but I can't even wrap my head around how they're going to manage to compensate people for that.
Yeah, Chris might have something to say about that, Adobe, but I'm going to try to get her the mic in a second. But because I know that she was talking about that when it first came out, that she was able to speak about that. So let me send her the mic. Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Hey, I can speak now, right?
Yep, you're good.
Yeah, okay. So I was collaborating with Adobe. Actually, it's my second time collaborating with them. First time I collaborated on generative AI guidelines for Adobe Stock, which happened in December. They launched this guidelines to make it official that people can submit generative AI to Adobe Stock. And the second time I collaborated recently on testing and providing feedback and making sure to mention any problems and ethical part as well about Adobe Firefly. So as of right now, the official information, there is a frequently asked questions document that they published, and they it, someone correctly said that it was trained on public domain images, also on images where copyright expired, and also there is some portion of it which was trained on Adobe stock images. And as long as I know, yes, they are figuring out a way to compensate contributors whose work was used on training, because not all images are good for training. And as my experience shows, that usually generative AI images may not be the best thing to use as a data set. So I am pretty sure that those images that were used from Adobe stock contributors will be definitely compensated, because I think Adobe right now is like the company that focused on ethics, and there is actually kind of like a organization that you can all join. It's free, and they are like talk about transparency and advocate for every image online to be kind of transparent how it was created, if Gen AI tools were used or not. And I know that Adobe is one of the organizations that are part of this transparency committee. So yeah, as long as I know, like right now they're just testing beta, so which means those images that are produced with Firefly can't be used commercially because they are testing it, and it has this gigantic watermark in the corner anyway. So it's like they are testing it, and people provide feedback. And if you are using Firefly, please write to Discord channel. Adobe has Discord channel where you can provide feedback if you get any results that you're not happy with, or some, the system is very new, so they want to make it as good as possible. But as long as I know, everyone is now interested how to use this system commercially, when they will open it to use commercially. I'm just like, just got a request from a brand asking if Firefly is possible to use, and I said unfortunately not. And then, just out of curiosity, I tried to generate images from the brief, and I was so surprised by quality, because that's one of the things that surprised me most, is that there are quite good results for such a small data set compared to data sets that Stability AI had.
I think you covered it nicely. It's almost a welcome addition, right? Like what I love about Adobe Firefly, and then let's loop back to NVIDIA. Interestingly, as we're talking about, a lot of NVIDIA is powering this Adobe experience. They're, in fact, one of the launch partners for Picasso that was announced here. But it's such a welcome addition to like the text to image, just the generative AI art world, right? Like there's so many people who've been hesitant to even play with these tools because of the narrative about, hey, like this is unethically scraped data. Like, I don't know if I can use this for commercial purposes. And, even though I would say the TLDR on the takeaway for Firefly right now is the model is good, but the UX is better. It's just far more intuitive to use, and you don't have to prompt a lot. The fact that there is now a path for a commercially viable text to image model, until of course all the other like legal precedent gets set about just simply scraping the internet. I think it's nice that there's an alternative there, and I'm already seeing a lot more of the commentary being like, I'm so glad Adobe did this. I'm excited to dive in and play with this tool. And finally, the fact that these capabilities are currently in this sort of like experimental labs, web hub, where they're going to put out more and more models. They've got text to image today. They've got also just text generation with text effects, and soon vector colorization's coming out, and they said even videos on the horizon. But that's just a hub. That stuff is all going to graduate to like the Adobe tools we all know and love, right? And so I think that's going to be super exciting, and it's going to bring in another wave of creatives that have perhaps been hesitant to play with this generative stuff. for ethical or, kind of copyright commercial viability reasons. And now there's going to be a path to go do that. So I think it's going to be super, super exciting.
Go ahead, AP.
Oh yeah. So like on the ethical stuff, I think it's a little interesting because like I was looking through the Adobe like tweet announcing it, and a lot of the people who contributed to Adobe stock were really mad because they were like, "Hey, like I had put my data in here and I don't have any option to like opt out." And Adobe's like, "Oh, by putting your images on the stock, like you're giving us the right to train our data on them on your images, right?" And so everyone was like, "Hey, what the heck? Like that's kind of messed up. Like I didn't have the option to opt out or opt in, right?" And this was like a similar thing that ArtStation was going through. So like I think the conversation around like ethical models is really something that's gonna be like still on the forefront for like the coming years, right? Because I don't know, like, is it really safe to say what Adobe's doing is ethical, right? Because they didn't get the opt in and the opt out of like other people as well. And it's like the same thing that goes with like Stable Diffusion as well, right? So I think like this conversation is really nuanced and like a lot of yeah, I just think it's going to be an interesting thing to come on because like even though they're claiming it's ethical, I don't really know if you can make that claim, right? But I mean, legally you can, right? But I don't know. It's a really interesting thing.
It's a really, really good point you're bringing up. I would say more ethical sort of been my take on it, but you're totally right. Like the question also about like, should it be opt out by default or opt in by default, right? Like that's an interesting one too. Hey, Linus has his hand up. But the one thing I'll just say on this one is like, if I put myself in Adobe shoes, like the fact that they have Behance as well, right? Like, and just think of like, I'm going to use the word treasure trove, but like the treasure trove of data on Behance, especially around like specific domains like UI UX design. The fact that they're choosing not to train these models on that and take this like better approach, and I think there's a whole debate over whether people even look at terms of service before they click to accept. And with people who are submitting imagery to Adobe stock, they never knew that generative AI is going to be a thing when they did it like several years ago. So I think it brings up an interesting question. But I would say, just like Getty Images is doing this stuff, right? Like I think it's better than just indiscriminately scraping the internet, but I think there's a whole philosophical debate to be had there as well. So my 2 cents. Linus.
Yeah, I found this both like interesting from the artist perspective, but I also found it quite like hypocritic because there's, for example, there's a whole subculture of people that are using other image generation tools like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion on different platforms to generate stock imagery that they then upload to Adobe Stock and that become bestsellers on Adobe Stock. And this is not a joke, and this is not a small subculture. It's big enough for there to be like whole communities built around this, and it's a way to kind of use Midjourney to make money, for example. So it is kind of interesting where like, yeah, we trained this on Adobe Stock, but who knows how much of the stuff that's already in Adobe Stock that was made by other AI generation models. And second is like, well, we're now in this phase where all these like essentially the latent space images are going to get derived from a large training set, and the larger the training set, the most likely the better the output. I'm just sensing that like pretty soon this cat and mouse game will be, I don't know, ending, and the companies that are developing these models will figure out ways to synthesize or augment the training data, just as what we're seeing with Dojo and Tesla, right? Even though Tesla has their 3 million vehicles on the roads, collecting infinite amount of video streams to train their self-driving, they still need to run Dojo. They still need to synthesize billions and billions of miles. So, like, I think we're just naive thinking that in the end, artists or people are going to have a say in this because we're just going to get run over by synthesized images anyways. That's going to train. That's my 5 cents. I don't mean to be disrespectful for any of the artists that might be listening or anyone that has a high opinion about this, but I'm just sensing that it might be wasteful of time if you're trying to like win the case against any of these big players, and then just 6 months or 12 months from now they're all just saying, hey, we're not using any copyrighted material or not copyrighted material anymore. We're synthesizing all our training data. So yeah, that's my 5 cents to add to the conversation. See, both Vicky and Chris has their hands up. I'm not sure who's first, but Yeah, go. And who should go? Vicky, I give you the mic.
The only reason I'll go is I have no customers in my store right now. Hi, everyone. Hi, Chris. Good to see you and hear from you again. It was very interesting this week with Adobe because being kind of around social media for probably, God, at least 30 years, scary. I was looking, I go deep. So when they were on Instagram, Adobe, and they were putting all their kind of posts out, I go deep and I look through everybody's comments, and it's very interesting to see different platforms' responses to AI, the big bad scary AI. Instagram is still a place whereby people have no real understanding of what AI is, how it learns. Let me go back to myself last year. I didn't really know. I just liked the idea of playing with it. And then when people start bringing up ethical concerns, I was like, oh, God, I need to educate myself more than I already am. And I think they've done a reasonable, as best as they can on Instagram, of introducing the quote unquote normies to what's coming. And I also think that they've been very select who they've given access to this week to make sure it's in the hands of the people that are going to talk about it in the right way. And I now start to see David from Midjourney venturing out and making comments on different people's posts, which he's not a big proponent of people making art on his platform and selling. And obviously now Adobe have come up and said, well, there's no commercial use on this. And then they've kind of stepped back and said, well, that's for now. But meanwhile, obviously, you're all making art on the beta, which they're obviously going to be able to train their models on. So, I mean, they're dipping their toe in pretty much like everybody else, Starbucks, all these other brands coming in. But as you just said earlier, it's us that are basically training the models for them to use. We are the early guinea pigs.
Thank you for your take on that, Vicky, and I appreciate it because you have such long ties too with social media. Go ahead, Chris.
So I was actually really inspired by Linus. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. I'm sorry if not. I was quite inspired because I almost missed the entire NVIDIA conference because I was working, but there was one thing that CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, said that really made me think. And I'm just really curious to hear all of your opinion, because what Linus mentioned was that how much of generative AI content was used to train the model, and honestly I don't know because I wasn't training that model, and I really hope to know. I'm very curious. I do know that they can opt, like, you always tag if you upload generative AI, but a lot of people aren't compliant and they don't do that. So I would be curious which portion of that data set was generative AI. But Jensen Huang said this phrase during NVIDIA conference: every single pixel will be generated soon, not rendered, generated. And I am curious to hear your opinion on that. What the world will be like when every single pixel, if he is right, will be generated and not rendered.
So I'm just going to speak to that. So, yeah, I think Jensen Huang has been right for a lot of years. I've been following him for the past 12 years online, and I've been an NVIDIA fanboy for as long as I can remember. He's right, and I'm wholeheartedly agreeing with his predictions on this one. And I think I kind of wanted to make that case today when I was kind of revealing the two images that both were AI generated. Obviously, you've seen this all over of Twitter for the past few days or weeks, where people are posting images and asking which one is AI generated. The problem is not that the images are AI generated. The problem is on a more societal level, where it's like when everything is generated and we don't know, like we can't use our eyes as kind of tools to deal with truth anymore. Like we can't look at an image and say, yeah, that's real. We can prove that that's real, because very soon we can't. And some people will say, well, that's always been an issue. We've had Photoshop. Someone that's skilled in Photoshop can make anything look real. Yeah, but the problem is that took time and it yielded like one image. Whereas like we're now entering an era where anyone with a computer can type a few words and get a very, very scary image of something that's not real, but they can spread it around as it's real. And then if you take a step back and you look at like, okay, there might be bad actors and you can do this stuff programmatically. Why not spin up like 1,000 instances that are generating 10,000 of images of events that have not taken place, but that look real enough that they will be used to fool people. So everything will be generated. I agree with that and that statement. It's going to be a very, very strange world to live in. The problems are how do we kind of like, or the questions to ask ourselves is like, how do we deal with that as a society? How do we deal with the implications of images not being able to be used as truth anymore? Obviously, there will be new technology coming along, so images in the end might look like cave paintings to us. We don't use cave paintings to dictate whether something is true or not. But in the day and age that we live in, we kind of are predominantly bound by images to kind of or moving pictures like movies to determine whether something actually have happened or not. Yeah, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent maybe, but I think that's where we need to think about these things. Like, yes, everything will be generated, but what is the implications of that?
Go ahead, Chris. You can go ahead and finish. You don't have to hold your hand up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Linus, for your response. I just want to mention that I mentioned before and I couldn't remember the name of it. It's called Content Authenticity Initiative, and anyone can join it. And I think it's really great for our AI community to join it, because they basically talk about the same thing that Linus talked about. It's about digital content provenance and transparency and how to achieve it. And companies can join as well. So Adobe joined this CAI initiative, and I joined as an individual. And it's very interesting to just look into what they publish, and they're trying to kind of promote transparency in all the images of internet.
Yeah, jumping in here on this is such a fascinating discussion, Chris. Thank you for raising this, and Linus. Maybe two responses to the everything will be generative. What does that mean? First, on the negative side, and then we'll go to the positive. I think the negative side, the Linus brought up with like large scale, disinfo at this will be at a scale that we just cannot even possibly imagine. And it is so true. Where for a while the gold standard was like, yeah, maybe you can like spoof images with Photoshop, but video is a little bit harder to do. Then of course visual effects came around and that stuff got democratized, and now video is like shaky. And so on one end I keep wondering is like, do we need like crazy 3D light field capture? Is that going to be the gold standard of provenance? But turns out, text to 3D is well on its way as well. So the way I've been pontificating on what happens when you fast forward this. And one analogy that keeps coming back to my head is sort of thinking about this stuff like how we deal with 0-day exploits today, where, whether you use an iPhone device or an Android device or whatever, or Windows, whatever machine you use, you know, it's not going to be rock solid. Things are going to fall through the cracks. And sort of, if you train a discriminator, as a part of, let's say, a content authenticity initiative, it's going to be a continuous journey, right? Like, it's not going to be, hey, we patched all the holes and now it's good. Because if you create a discriminator to figure out what's AI generated, somebody else could use the discriminator to create a new model, a generator model that could bypass it. So it'll constantly be like this the next generation of information security is certainly going to be a lot more about like multimodal content like this. And it'll be a constant journey to keep up with various ways to spoof and get around ways to validate what is and isn't AI. So that's the negative side. I think on the positive side, particularly with NVIDIA, like what was interesting to me about, I didn't get a chance to see the full events, but one thing I deep dive into was Picasso. And we talked about this, right? It's like, so in any future right now, it seems like NVIDIA is going to benefit, right? Like, because everything's running on NVIDIA GPUs for the most part, right? Like their TPUs and other things in the wild too. Mostly people are building on NVIDIA. And if you look at who their launch partners for Picasso was, like Adobe, Getty Images, that's also making their text to image stuff, Shutterstock, same thing. And then their customer success stories are like Runway ML. So it's like pretty much the who's who of like, in this content generation space is building on NVIDIA. Now, if you go and look at it from NVIDIA's perspective, they built these machines that were initially, this hardware that was initially for like gaming, and now it's found this massive application in like, large scale multi matrix multiplication for, AI stuff. It's a good question to also ask, how does generative AI just change real-time 3D applications? How does it change augmented reality? And I think there'll be some very interesting things happening there. Maybe a conversation or two ago, we talked about what happens when you can run stable diffusion at 30 FPS, right? Like, I think the same question applies where everything might be generative. Like a game that you play might at least be like some sort of split architecture where it's like 3D, some stuff happening with a 3D engine, and then you can imagine something like ControlNet feeding that into this generative model to turn it into super high fidelity on the fly. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how on all levels of the stack, generative could kind of, be used for offline content creation to start, but then could, dovetail into real-time content creation as well. So that's maybe the dark side and the bright side of this whole conversation about everything being generative.
Yeah, perfect. I think that concludes. Heather, where are we in terms of
We're on to
the
the
list?
Bing image creator, Dolly, or did we? No, we didn't talk about that. We were just talking about the Adobe.
Sounds good. Matt, you wanna do an intro? So good at this.
Yeah, sure. So Bing just recently rolled out basically they made an announcement that they're going to start having image generation directly inside of Bing Chat. So if you're familiar with the regular Bing Chat right now, they're going to make it so you can say, draw me a picture of a cat in an astronaut suit on Mars, right? And then it will just use DALL-E and generate an image right there in Bing. However, they didn't actually put it into Bing yet. If you go to, I think it's bing.com/create, you can play with it. But what it is it's an advanced version of DALL-E. So OpenAI also runs DALL-E. They're the people behind ChatGPT. And there's been rumors that a DALL-E 3 is coming out soon. Some people even speculate that what we're able to play with right now inside of Bing Create is DALL-E 3. I don't know. But yeah, it's definitely an improved version of DALL-E. I've spent a little bit of time playing around with it, and if anybody's played with DALL-E, it doesn't hold a candle to Mid-Journey or what you can do with some of the newer models built inside of Stable Diffusion. It's actually pretty dang good, and yeah, I'm pretty impressed with it. I don't know if everybody has it yet. I don't know how it's been rolled out. I went over to bing.com/create and I had access to it when I tried, but I don't know if I got early access or if it's fully rolled out for people. Other people will have to let me know. I'm not totally sure. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is a super, super deep discussion. I think this is one we could probably chat about for a minute and then move on to like the Canva stuff. But that's really the gist of it, is that it's a newer, more advanced version of DALL-E that you can use directly inside of Bing right now. I saw Linus wanted to say something, so why don't you jump in there?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think what it is, it's DALL-E 2 experimental. Maybe someone in here has access. I've had access for a few weeks. So it's actually in the labs.openai.com website where where you can use the normal DALL-E. And if you got access, there's a little drop down that allows you to kind of like switch between the old one and the new one. And what's interesting is that they kind of like took a lot of learnings from Midjourney prompting. So now, if you do prompting similarly to how you do prompting in Midjourney, you can actually get some really insane results there. So I think this is what they've shipped inside of inside of Bing Image Creator. Maybe it's even something that's slightly further ahead, but it looks like, from what I've been seeing in the labs, it looks like same stuff. So that's pretty interesting, because it's a step change in terms of like where DALL-E is currently in its open model compared to like what we're seeing here. So that's cool. But I think you're true, Matt. Like we don't need to talk more about this. If not
I did
anyone,
want to.
I got one
Burhan,
question here, if I
Burhan
may.
is he works
yeah,
at
go ahead.
Microsoft, and right. I don't know if you had anything to add to that, You have to.
Yeah, Burhan, just jump in here. I'll pause my
I
question for a sec.
apologize.
Mike on Burnham. Burnham, go.
Oh, sorry. It's Burhan. Sorry.
Sorry.
Can you?
Sorry, apologies.
Yeah, no worries. So I just wanted to add there that the image creator is actually available in the Bing app and in the Bing chat as well. And I think everyone should have access starting today to it. I definitely played with it within the Bing app and the Bing chat. And I was able to create some images, and I actually posted some memes I've been playing with. So I have this corgi, who shows up in different cities every day, just traveling around the world. And I've been posting some of those pictures on my profile, so you can take a look. It's definitely it's pretty good. I would say the quality is compared to Mid Journey. I would say it's on par at this point. Um, and the one thing I wanted to also maybe ask people for their comments on is how much of a difference shipping this feature in Bing would make, in comparison to like products from Google, which might, come out in a month or so, and how much of a bigger advantage Microsoft or OpenAI has at this point, shipping products like this so early. And I'm asking that not because I work at Microsoft, but because someone who is interested in this space. Thank
Well,
you.
I have a question about that. About I've been using the image creator quite a bit this week with my 25 credits that I had, and I was wondering what happens when that runs out. There's no information about what the cost will be or like a subscription, and I assume that you have to use your Microsoft. You buy it from the Microsoft store. So I don't know. Do you know how that works? Because that would be a big part of whether or not it's useful to have it in the chat or anything. Because if you have to pay for it, I wouldn't want to, it wouldn't be too helpful. But I was just wondering if anybody knew that. That would be nice to know. Because I do like it. And I think the images it produces are really nice. It's very good. Anybody
Yeah,
knows?
I wouldn't have any information about that.
Okay.
I've just been using it casually.
No, I appreciate that, and I don't know if anybody else has anything to say, but yeah, I enjoyed using it so far. I think it's the results have been very nice on the first try too. So I thought that it would produce pretty really good output. So I'm hoping that there's some kind of affordable or even a renewable, like you get so many free credits per month. That would be nice.
So I'm inside of the I just actually tested it inside of Bing Chat and it is working. You can literally type I just typed draw me a picture of a cat and it generated a cat right inside of Bing Chat right now. So you don't even need to do it inside of bing.com create. So very very cool. But I'm looking at the credit system right now, and when I hover over it, it says I have 19 boosts for today. Use your boost to create images more quickly. If you run out, image generation may take longer. So it doesn't look like there's actually a limit to how many images you can create. It's almost like Midjourney's, fast generation.
Oh,
It seems like where once you run out of credits, it's just a slower process to generate the images. That's what I'm gathering from looking at the
oh,
site
that's a
now.
good point. Oh, Batik, did you have something to say? I'd appreciate any information on that.
Sure. So I was just thinking about some of the conversation about some of the recent image generators that have been launched, especially on the high end. The new version of Midjourney, the new thing in Bing. Super speculative. If it's drawing hands, if it's having a go at drawing a reasonable amount of text, I'm guessing these are probably the higher parameter count models. So if you look at something like, say Stable Diffusion 1.5 or whatever, the number of parameters are probably around 830 million. And sort of the next gen models, I guess they're going to be current gen very soon, are probably more around sort of like 2.5 to 3 billion parameters. And they could still be compressed down so they fit in memory a little bit more efficiently as well. So there's definitely some efficiency improvements. But if it's getting better coherency around hands, if it's getting better coherency around text, that's a little bit of a tell for higher parameter models. There may be something else going on, But I'm guessing, yeah, if you're seeing those big improvements, it's probably a next gen model. That's my take on it. Bit of a hot take, but there it is.
We want the
Yeah.
hot takes. Get the hot sauce like ready because we're about to jump to Canva next. Before that, I did want
Oh
to
boy.
reply to just want to reply to the question. I mean, is this like how does this change the perception of Bing? I think it's all upside from Microsoft, right? Like who even used the term Bing until like all this AI stuff happens? I think it's like only good things from a Microsoft standpoint. Plus, it's also just hilarious, and maybe this will segue to the conversation. A question I wanted to ask about OpenAI and Microsoft, which is it just feels more and more like Silicon Valley, the TV show. Like I was listening to Satya Nadella's interview by The Verge, and that one's hilarious. Where he's like, "Yo, basically about getting the 800-pound gorilla to dance, and like we made Google dance and all this other stuff." But then also the response from the editor in chief at The Verge was hilarious. He's like, "Yeah, Satya was on his A game. He had a tight shirt on. He was looking good." I'm like, "What? Where is this conversation going? Like, what is?" It's like the battle of the Titans is kind of playing out. So I'm super excited about that. But one question I have, especially around this question of credits and all this other stuff we're bringing up, it's sort of in the public sphere shining an interesting light on the relationship between Microsoft and OpenAI, where we had the whole like one German article with the Microsoft Germany CTO about, hey, GPT-4 is coming. And that's how we all found out that this was coming next week. And then obviously OpenAI actually made the announcement themselves. And then in a similar fashion, we all heard about, a bunch of people got early access to the new DALI model. Perhaps it was the larger parameter count model or whatever. But regardless of that, it was given some people got access and then it actually shows up in Bing, right? Like, and it's not still like available broadly in OpenAI itself, even if you're a paying customer. So there's this like I don't know exactly what's going on. So my question is like, what is this? What do y'all think is going on in the background here? Some speculation on Microsoft and OpenAI.
I just think it's interesting too. When you look at like GPT-4, right? We got access to Bing Chat, 6 weeks ago or something like that. And when it came out, they're like, this is not GPT-4. This is Bing Chat. It's a specially trained model of OpenAI's ChatGPT 3.5. It's definitely promises not GPT-4. GPT-4 launches, and then the same day, Microsoft goes, oh yeah, and by the way, that was GPT-4 all along. So, just to sort of go back to what Batik was saying there, I think that they have a tendency to kind of put out these next gen models without telling us they're the next gen models, see how we react to them. And then if the reaction is positive, go, yep, that was the next gen model we were telling you about.
And there was a very interesting line. Somebody, I think, press asked Satya, hey, is this GPT-4? And he kind of punted the question and said, I'll let Sam comment on the numbering of the GPTs. And I was like, that itself was like, okay, I see what's going on. Any other comments on this OpenAI Microsoft thing? If not, let's move
Batik,
on
did you
to
have something
Canva.
to add?
Sorry, just one more thing. I think as far as that goes, in terms of what's going on in the background of the versions it's released, there's definitely some sort of corporate gymnastics around that, right? Around sort of like the stories they tell themselves and the stories they tell users around that. That is, to a certain degree, at this point somewhat normal, right? So they could have legitimately been doing both, right? So they do these things, they've got all sorts of different names. You can call them A/B tests, you can call them experiments, you can call them wherever. But they could be doing something like, they'll have a certain percentage of users are using the new version of GPT, a certain percentage of users are using the old one, and they basically just gradually ramp up the numbers until it switches over. So they could legitimately say that they had launched GPT-4 back then, even though only a small number of percentage users were using it or whatever. It's definitely like extracting exactly what happened in sort of post hoc analysis is super hard to do because like I said, there's so much like weird flipping and gymnastics around this that like, trying to draw an actual picture of it and trying to figure exactly what's happening it's intentionally obfuscated and it's hard to track.
Oh, speaking of drawing a picture of it, let's type it into the new DALL-E and ask it.
Do it.
All right, I think we were good on that topic. Let's get going with Canva. Like literally everything
Yeah.
under the sun got announced. Taylor, you wanna kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of kind of these like rollout release approaches, I think Bautic, maybe you can clarify for me. You're over on the Canva side of things, but definitely Canva was trickling out some teasers for a while. I noticed like layers or something like that last week. I saw how you can separate everything. There were just like little things here and there that I was finding, and I'm a designer, I'm a creative, and I'm a podcast host. So I'm pretty much in Canva. Like I have it open as much as I have ChatGPT open all day these days. So when I started to see those little things happening behind the scenes, I got really, really excited. And then at Canva Create yesterday, Canva announced a whole suite of AI powered design tools that are now available in the platform. I assume some might still be rolling out. But it's great because I think it's a huge like massive sign or signal in this space, especially in brand design and for like freelance designers and independent creators and personal brands and small businesses and things like that who are using Canva day in and day out. By the way, I think that the number is like 125 million active users monthly active users. I think that's the number. Um, but in a way, it's like with that many people on board, this is going to change the game because even only Microsoft really so far has shown potential of AI and creative workspaces like this at scale. Adobe's still working on it. And so this is a milestone. It's a big deal. And there's been a lot of little updates here and there that I'm really excited to kind of get my hands into. There's the assistant feature that searches design elements, that gives recommendations. I love some of the stuff that's down in like the brand hub as well. You have like that magic replace, or you can put, there's some additional features, I think, for brand templates, folders, guidelines. It's just been awesome. So wondering, Boutique, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of what it's been like behind the scenes on this push as well, because I'd love to hear it. As a user, I'm a big fan so far. I can't wait to like get into it more and more over the next couple days.
Sure. Obviously, there's just, I'll preface it. So obviously, I got to say that I work for Canva. I also got to preface to say there's lots of things I can't say. But it's been very exciting. It's been 6 months of solid work getting this out of the door. I think when the whole generative AI thing kicked off, I think it was fairly clear that everyone was going to be involved, right? It didn't matter about the size of your place. Like, we all very quickly got this intuition that this was coming for us all. And I think the challenge for Canva was trying to figure out which subset of problems we were going to engage with, right? And luckily we don't suffer too much from being outside of the Silicon Valley ecosystem, which is really lucky for us. We get to be kicking goals without having to sort of like be in that, which is really nice. It's a fairly sort of like it's a fairly nice thing to be, which meant that we were able to sort of like approach some of these problems without getting so much of the FOMO pressure that was there if you're actually there in California, which was kind of nice. And the focus then was really sort of, and this is again, absolutely not news for anyone, which is, trying to figure out what we were going to do that was, I guess, kind of like a multiplier rather than, coming up with things that were completely new. Like, so what could we do in terms of using ML to really sort of like plus up user workflows rather than come up with totally new flows, right? And I think that has been really interesting, right? And if you look at sort of like the potential of ML going forward, it's really, I think generative is interesting, but it's a pit stop, right? If you look at the history of deep learning, where it was and where it was going, where it came out of computer vision was that, these models, these tools were designed to sort of understand the world, right? They were designed to sort of understand it and comprehend it, so it could do things like one of the earliest target was self-driving cars. How that all relates back to Canva then is that you've got these sophisticated models that are being developed. You've got these sophisticated techniques that are being developed that allow us to basically just understand digital media and manipulate it in very naturalistic ways, right? So, the challenge for us then was, how can we take these tools that can, magnify expression, that can magnify intent, and just put them in the right place, right? So a lot of our ML interventions have been very surgical, and they're about sort of enhancing workflows rather than sort of coming up with totally new ones. The totally new stuff is nice, but again, we want to like focus on solving user problems rather than sort of like making too much stuff up. I mean, the innovation side of things is cool, and I think that during the process of this, obviously we did come up with some things that were totally new, but I just got to wonder, sort of like just a little bit more broadly, like well outside of Canva, how much new stuff is going to be generated and how much is going to be sort of like rewrapped, and it's going to be sort of like extending existing workflows that we have and making them more naturalistic. That's a whole nother conversation. So anyway, I'll step away from the mic. I think Linus, you wanted to go next.
So I basically, I just wanted to like my well, how do I phrase this? I don't want to come off as so the thing I like with Canva is the positioning. I think Canva is an absolute amazing company, and the suite of products are great. And what's interesting for me is that Canva's managed to like try to go to the everyday user that is not a professional, in the sense where they spend 10,000 hours learning the full Adobe suite, and kind of Canva's superpower is to distill and remove and just keep the bare essentials to get the job done. And from the suite of ML or AI tools that got released yesterday, I'm sensing more or less that ethos all across the new tools. It's not like the best in class tools for doing AI stuff, far from it, but it's very like purposely, hopefully purposefully fully done so that it fits within the Canva ecosystem in a very Canva way. So I just wanted to like say that I think you guys should be really proud of that, and it might be that this is what gives most people actually access to these new tools, because everything that I've seen is pretty hard to get to, or hard to, like, the learning curves are pretty steep, whereas like the stuff in Canva, the learning curve is like it's almost non-existent. So I think in the mission, kind of my mission is to get more people to use AI tools and learn these tools. I think Canva is just like superpowered that, and made it so that it's going to be a lot easier for people to engage with these tools. So just wanted to say that, not really a question, not really like anything, just a statement.
Oh, go ahead, Batik.
Yeah, I'd say, well, thank you, Linus. I appreciate the positioning there. And yeah, absolutely. Like, again, it's no secret that, we're targeting, the consumer user base. I think, as much as I'd love to comment on it, because I also used to work for Adobe, there's different market positioning to Adobe. So, to a certain degree, we're solving different set of user problems. But in terms of not best in class, whew, that's an interesting comment.
Zinger, baby.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's totally fine. I'd say that we did a whole range of things, right? And I think just having seen things under the hood, staying up to date with the research and staying up to date with the competitors, there's definitely, there's definitely some of the stuff that is, I guess, sort of like, keeping up with our neighbors and sort of like, making sure our lawn is as green as theirs. But there's definitely stuff in there that obviously I can't say anything about that. We're very, very, very proud of, that I would, I'd happily stick my neck out to say sort of is unique. But obviously, it's really hard to tell that story. What's going to be really interesting, I think, over the next few months, though. I mean, like, there's this little slice that we see, right? And there's a little slice that, I think, coming back to the original question, like, what was it like behind the scenes? There's this little slice that we see about what's happening in companies via press releases, right? So you see this press release and this big thing goes out, and it's been through several layers of marketing and approval. And as a community, we respond to these things and we try to sort of like infer what's going on. But on the other side of that, right? So on the sort of the R&D side, on the sort of like the front where we're building things, it's continuous work, right? And it's this continuous loop between sort of like basically trying stuff out, seeing whether it solves problems for our users, right? So like Google, Apple, Microsoft, we all Canva, we've all got different slices of the market. We've got different slices of users that we're trying to. Actually, in fact, users is a terrible word. Customers, right? We got different customers that we're trying to solve for, right? And we've all got slightly different variants on this. And I remember some of the breathless commentary. It was like it all happened in 2 days. It's like, oh, Canva, you better look out for Adobe. And literally 2 days later, the headlines had just flipped, and it was the exact same thing with just the words transposed, right? It's like, okay, Adobe, you better look out. Canva's coming for you. And I don't think that's, it's a little, at least like being on the front line of this, it's a little bit silly. And I think if you look at the relationships between sort of like these companies, these researchers will travel between these companies. We all kind of know each other. The relationship there is much more collegial, right? And it's a lot more cooperative than I think most people realize. And it's not quite so adversarial. There's this, basically everybody's looking for a slice of the pie, but in terms of that sort of like, X company has gone out to destroy Y, that's just marketing guff, right? So
Yeah, for sure. It's part, it's marketing, and it's also part, like, it actually is quite funny because like it's very clear that there are different market segments and the customer base is very different. And I'm not saying,
absolutely.
I didn't mean like you're not best in class as a bad thing,
I know.
but there are
Don't
different.
undrop the hammer, Linus. You dropped the hammer, dude.
I'm not gonna pull it back up. Actually, it's on the toes. Actually, what's interesting is that I think there is. We spoke about this 2 or 3 weeks ago with background removal, and that there are
Yeah,
many companies trying to solve background removal,
absolutely.
particularly.
Yeah.
And I guess from, yeah, I mean, I know a few companies that are doing that, and they're
Uh-huh.
extremely well positioned to do that. And I'm not sure
Absolutely.
either Canva or Adobe is doing a great job.
Look, I mean, I can tell you that the best in class stuff there is coming out of VFX, and again, that's no surprise, right? All the folks who do rotoscoping is that's another one of my another one of my previous lives. I was in VFX for quite a while, and the I've got a couple of friends there who are working for various studios and stuff, and they've developed their own in-house tools for doing this, and it's very much sort of like again this concept of using ML to accelerate workflows, and they're gradually taking over larger and larger chunks of the workflow, right? So I think Roto is actually a wonderful example of one of those things where when ML background removal, basically, or rotoscoping, or whatever you want to call it, came up, there was a lot of nervousness that this was going to wipe out entire classes of jobs, right? This was going to make rotoscoping go away, and it employed thousands of people, right? Especially in countries that were outside of, I guess, sort of the traditional studio train, right? So, for example, it employed a lot of people in the Philippines. It employed a lot of people in India. And the worry was that ML was going to make these entire studios, these entire industries in these countries just disappear. It didn't. All it did was that it facilitated the people that were working on these tools to first of all increase their throughput. There's just so much work right now that they just can't keep up, right? So they're able to just work faster. And the other thing is that they then focused on really then taking the first pass that ML would do and make it better. And then they're able to also focus on other more creative things to work on as well, which meant greater job satisfaction and a better looking creative result, right? If creatives could be creative, they're a lot happier, right? So,
But
I
like
think,
also the third thing of people are
yeah,
basically drawing ground truth, right? For
yeah,
training these models to make the rotoscoping automated.
Exactly, right. The data has got to come from somewhere. So, and it's got to come from somewhere that is not a computer. Like the data at some point has to come from humans because, what's the job here, right? We're training these networks to be at least as good as or better than humans, right? But to get that, they need to have that baseline human performance. And that's got to come from humans. It's got to come from somewhere, right? So,
I just want to unpack a few things there that didn't have a lot to do with rotoscoping, but that came out of this. I think
sure.
number one, you said something really interesting, and I think that's true in all of this, in the revolution that we're kind of in, and that's like they that people were able, like, you get AI to do part of the job, to take you 80% there or 70% there, and then you do the rest, and that gives you more job satisfaction, for example. Sorry for paraphrasing. And the other thing is kind of around that you throughput, that you can work more, not necessarily like in the sense that, oh, now we're running a sweatshop, let's make sure everyone produces 100x more, but just the fact that you're kind of doing more, and you're creatively fulfilled. I think these two things are super important to remember in all of this stuff that's going on, not just like generative art or LLMs, but in general. Like, if people adopt these tools, this is the output that I suspect, or that I think that we will see people more happy doing the jobs that they are doing, and doing less shit work, and shit work being like whatever monkey work that you might be doing today that AI can do for you. And ultimately your throughput will be higher, and you feel more fulfilled because, like, you'll do more volume of work. So yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add that I think those two things are super important.
No,
So thank you for saying that.
absolutely. I think then the challenge, I guess the other side of this then, and this is it's there's a chunk of this problem which is got to do with R&D, right? So it's got to do with building these networks. It's got to do with building or adapting or fine tuning or whatever. But like the actual machine learning part of it, right? And adapting it to the sort of the media that you're working with. So whether that's a design or a piece of text or video, audio, whatever, right? But then there's another part of this which is a much more interesting one that sits in between, which is UX, right? So and looking at the interfaces to these tools, and that I feel like is in fact it is. It's a whole separate discipline on its own. And what that really comes down to is extracting intent, right? So you've got an idea that sits inside your brain, right? And you've got to somehow squeeze that out. As currently with the current set of tools as that we've got, the majority of them, we do it via prompts, right? And these prompts are words, right? So what you've got to do is that if you've got an idea in your head, you've got to not only translate it into words, but you've got to translate it into this weird sort of like peculiar dialect of English that these models use, right? And then use that to sort of express what you're doing. And that is, it'll do for now. And it is quite rich, right? But, a big chunk of work that is happening everywhere right now that is not super visible is working on making it easier for people to be able to express their ideas, and then using that as a way of articulating these tools rather than using prompts. And I think that is going to be another really interesting thing to watch over the next year or so. And I think it's going to be one of the biggest UX challenges of our generation. It's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, one quick reaction to both of y'all talking about this is just like, what an interesting time to be alive, where like the tools that people have been used to, I think people will be more inclined now to go try other tools. What I mean by that is, I'm certainly in Camp Adobe because that's just what I grew up learning, and now it's muscle memory. And while I wouldn't use the choice words Linus did about best in class about Canva or not, but he's our Swedish hammer. He's got to drop a couple of hammers at least. But I will say this: like, it's so funny because Adobe is the tanker ship, right? And Canva is like the speedboat. Y'all are just like way nimbler, way faster. You do all in one. Both like I was blown away when you shared that Canva video like edit. I was like, I didn't even know you could do video in Canva and like all this other stuff. So the fact that this tool is more all in one, it'll be interesting to see. And now that there's way more AI stuff in there, certainly I am more inclined to go give Canva a shot, right? Like,
Yeah.
and not wait for drips of things to end up in Adobe. And I think the same applies to Bing. Like, I remember watching a TV show a couple years ago, and it's like the cast, like one of the lead actors, is like, "Yeah, why don't you just Bing it?" And I was like, "What? Who the hell says Bing it?" But 2023, who thought that was on the bingo card? So I think as AI gets infused into, kind of established vertical specific
Mm.
products, whether that's the Nukes of the world or the After Effects or the Hit Films or the Canvas or
Yeah.
whatever it is, it's like people are going to be way more inclined to try other stuff out than previously, because it's more than just a Me Too product. It's like a completely different approach for like a tanker to infuse AI versus a speedboat.
Yeah. I'd say just to maybe just magnify that a little bit. And again, this is perhaps sort of this is definitely an opinionated take, but again, I view these tools as very much sort of like magnification, right? So they magnify what's there, and to a certain degree, they also magnify the character of companies that build them, right? Adobe's got a much more cautious approach. They've got a much more sort of like on rails approach. They did that with Firefly. Um, you know, uh, Google is also sort of like fairly guarded, but they've got a particular way they deploy things, right? So, and they're very much about like, can we wrap this up in an API? Is AWS going to do the same thing? And like Canva's particular flavor of this is accessibility, right? So if you look at sort of like what our founders said around this, like many years ago around the intent of Canva was meant to be sort of like accessible. So when we put our own sort of like spin on using ML, the big focus here has been on accessibility. How can we make this necessary? How do we make this easy to use rather than necessarily differentiated in terms of function? So that I think is coming too. But again, you've got this weird little like layer that comes on top in terms of them, I guess, reflecting the character of the people that build them to a certain degree. No, that's anthropomorphizing, and you shouldn't do it. But there's a little bit of that in there. Anyway, I'll hand it back to Linus.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Okay, so sorry for that. It was like, oh shit, who's going? Well,
Race
okay, yeah.
condition. Go for it. Go for it.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. So Mint, did you want to add something to this conversation? I see you got the mic. You're on the speaker list. If you want to add something, please go ahead, Mint.
Oh, I appreciate that. I honestly, I'm just listening to this part. I work in like generative images at Scenario as their head of customer success. So part of my big piece is like how to fine tune and how to really create pretty consistent outputs. And I think, I work a lot with specifically artists and designers. So it's just been really interesting to hear Canva's approach to this. And, I've used Canva for a really long time as someone in and out of the space. So certainly a lot of appreciation there. But I don't have too much to add. I think that the one piece I will say is that this is sort of parallel but not directly related. I do find when listening to some of these discussions, and not even necessarily this one, although it's veering sometimes in and out of that direction, that I find people often assume the artist workflow without actually knowing the artist workflow. And that's a piece that I really appreciated hearing the Canva approach to, because it was one of the few times that I've actually heard someone really indicating a clear understanding of what an artist workflow looks like. We talk about like going ahead and advance, et cetera. But the reality is, I don't think that that's something that I think oftentimes we think in terms of how a dev would think about it, and not at all how an artist would think about it. And I think it's really important to remember that artists are using these tools, and the way they're using these tools are often far outside of how devs are thinking someone may use them or should use them.
I'm going to use this as a reason to actually go back to Firefly, because we did kind of gloss over it just because they're like, oh, there's Firefly, there's Dolly, Bing image generator, text to image, boring, let's move on. But to this point about just like understanding like the user journey for like a creator, like it comes through so nicely in Firefly, right? Like, so if you go look at the interface, it's the prompt, the text prompt that Botik was also talking about, is a way to describe the contents of the scene. And then all the other stylistic stuff that you'd want to do, all of that is handled by this panel on the left side, right? So let me see if I can very quickly pin my post on that, just so you have the interface to look at as well. And I think that just shows, like, I just could tell that this was made by like product designers, managers, and engineers who like actually know what artists are doing, because no longer do you have to sit around like iterating on like an obtuse prompt, you know, for so long just to get that look dialed in. Instead, what you can do is just like look at a bunch of these like preset styles, lighting conditions, you know, like camera angles, or sorry, focal lengths and camera perspectives, and change that decoupled from the prompt itself. And so, you know, low key, I'm actually hoping that, like, you know, again, like the takeaway for Firefly definitely is, you know, good model but amazing UX. I'm actually hoping that this sets a standard for all the other text image generators out there, with like obviously Midjourney V5 being a favorite of many people out there. Like, I can't wait till there's an interface like Adobe has for something like Midjourney. It's going to be wild. And, you know, it's super exciting to see like tool companies that have just like live and breathe the creator space get into this, because, you know, maybe the other undertone of what Mint alluded to is like, it's funny how, you know, so these models, these generative models hallucinate, and that hallucination turns out to be a feature, not a bug when it comes to creative stuff, whether that's creative writing or image generation. So you are seeing a lot of people get into sort of the creative space that haven't walked the path of a creator, or ever created or achieved any level of notoriety. And you can tell when it's like that product versus another one. So it's interesting where, you know, we may start reaching a point where the models themselves might be like commodity across the board, and it will be the UX and, you know, kind of where you meet the user and their workflow that differentiates and decides what's going to be the biggest application out there.
Yeah, and I do think it's also important to think about who the tools are being designed for. And I think, like, you know, outside of the really sometimes hard to sit through meetings in product design, we don't always think about the fact that really how a tool functions is super thought through and indicative of who the company considers to be their customer base. And so, of course, something like Firefly or something like Canva is going to be incredibly useful for a designer or an artist, because the reality is they are going to be focusing on their customer base. And I think we see that in Canva and in Firefly, because Canva is for designers, but also for folks who maybe don't have as much of a design background and just kind of want to pull a lot of things together, create a really strong presentation or something like that. And Firefly, on the other hand, their core demographic, if they're an Adobe product, is really professional design. And so we're going to see different levels of usability and also difficulty. And I know that that's a really big, I think what we're seeing in the challenge right now for a lot of people in the space, especially companies that aren't so clearly defined as something like an Adobe or a Canva, is because of generative AI, we are starting to see an intersection between people who are trained artists, trained professional artists, and people who have a natural talent for aesthetic, but were not able to maybe put pen to paper or express themselves in a way that they considered a visual art before. And how, in fact, you are finding that both audiences need a tool that works for them. Oftentimes, they're looking in the same spot now, but the level of education around how to use tools has been completely shifted. The lowest common denominator has been completely shifted, and we have to both cater to that and also find ways to educate, to be able to keep everyone in a similar space. So anyway, it's really interesting. It's problems we're trying to solve every day.
Hey, Bothik, jump in here.
Yeah, look, I just want to echo that. Like, absolutely. Like, you know, it's really important to, like, I mean, this is like the first thing you do in like any sort of like engineering is like understand the customer, right? Like, if you don't really understand the problem that you're solving, you're not gonna make a very good thing, right?
Do all engineers
And
actually do that? I don't know. Just asking as a PM. I don't know.
no, not all of them do. Like, I mean, look, some people like, and you know, I guess I'll knock. I guess engineering is a discipline, right? They include sort of like, you know, the people who are writing code, but then like, you know, the people who write the requirements, like, you know, the project managers and stuff. Like, it's really important to sort of like understand the problem that you're solving. And to that end, I've done a bit. I've been around, I guess, the creative industries for a little while, and it's been really interesting the number of people that I run across who, you know, have become artists themselves, you know, on top of, so, you know, say doing like R&D work or research work or engineering work, because they did that because they wanted to understand the problem they were solving. And I thought that was really, really, really cool. And I want to give a shout out to one of my favorite people, Professor Aaron Hertzman, over at Adobe. He's he's one of my favorite researchers, a bit of an inspiration on that front, but he's a really cool guy. And he did a lot of the, I guess, a lot of what we commonly use in Photoshop with sort of stylization work, and he's still very involved there. But you know, he's a working artist, right? So he paints a lot, and he uses that as a reflection to learn about the tools that he's building as well. And I thought that was really cool. And there's a number of people, like, I guess, sort of like in the industry who, actually, visual effects as well is another big area where that happens. You know, people who start out as artists who, you know, get frustrated with the process, and they go, okay, I'm gonna solve this problem. Then they come from the other direction, right? So they start out as artists, and they go, okay, right, I don't have a tool that will solve my problem, so I'm going to learn XYZ thing to solve it. And just the number of people, like, for example, like back when I was at Lucasfilm, the number of people who were there who, you know, didn't have a formal university education, right? They were just really good artists, but then, you know, they rose up very high in the engineering ranks because they were just passionate about solving their problem. They just learned things as they needed as they needed to go, as they had to, like, solve the problems they had. And I thought that was really cool. So there's definitely folks who, I guess, are sort of multidisciplinary like that. They do exist, and I think they're a little bit hidden, but it's nice to know that they're there. So that's my particular take on that.
Yeah, just to close out this conversation, I think it's a fascinating discussion about how UX is going to become far and more important, and also the point about, you know, I think Mint was bringing up the point about how people who have not traditionally played with these tools, right? So one might argue that if you haven't grown up with Adobe, Canva was supposed to be more attractive and appealing to you. In a similar fashion, I think, like with Premiere and frickin' Descript, like another great example. You know, Descript is suddenly making video accessible to people who know how to edit a doc and work with slides, and you can bring that sort of like, you know, motif and interaction model to actually work with video itself. But if you are a sophisticated video editor, you could still tap on the timeline and go get that timeline style detail, right? So it'll be very interesting to see how AI opens up newer modalities to people where this was out of reach. So I think, like, pithy line I like to say is like, people who can write text can make photos, people who can make photos can make video, video can do freaking 3D, and then just, I don't know, metaverse or something. So I'll stop there. I think, yeah, I don't know who had the hand up first, but Mint or Linus, you wanna go?
I just wanted to kind of echo or kind of build on top the barrier of entry. So I think, like, all these things that we're talking about, and kind of knowing your customers and all this stuff, is like essentially what's happening is like we're lowering the barrier to entry on most of these things. Canva has made millions of people able to create creatives, to make art, to make, you know, assets for the internet, for their businesses. And I think what we're seeing with Descript is the same. We're just opening up the doors to people to do video. So it's lowering the barrier to entry on creative workflows. I think it's one of the most important things that we can do to kind of give humans that. I think Mint said it. They could not sit, or maybe it was Botek. We cannot use pen to paper, right? But that they have ideas, and they want to get these ideas out there. And I think AI will kind of like make this possible on a massive scale, where the person with the idea or that can describe what they want are going to be able to output that from their brain into the world and kind of communicate that. I think that's going to be important. So I just wanted to add that. And Mint, go ahead, please. Let us know
Oh,
what's on your mind.
yeah, that's a similar reflection, honestly. And I do have to say that, as someone who is a designer and has been a designer for a long time, and of course I've used Adobe products quite a lot. Um, I have to hand it to Canva though. Like, there's been so many times where it's like, I don't want to run an entire, like, situation on my computer where I have to like adjust all these things. I actually really just want it to be like drag and drop and resize, and I don't want to have to think about it too much. And I think the barrier to entry part is huge, because barrier to entry is also barrier to spaces. Like, I always say this, and I think that it can be a little bit of a tricky issue to talk about because people tend to politicize it. But the arts, design, these have historically been pretty difficult to enter spaces because education for them has been considered a luxury. Access to these tools is not cheap. It's a luxury. And so the more we are democratizing this type of education, the more it's easy for people who are actually genuinely incredibly talented but never had the opportunity to access um, aesthetic expression, I like to call it, before. And I just think that's really important. And I think that the barrier to entry sometimes gets underemphasized.
Could I ask you a question? I think you're bringing up such a good point. This point about the barrier to entry for visual creation has always been higher. And in many ways, one might interpret the sort of backlash to the AI art movement sort of as gatekeeping, right? Like, it's like, yo, like, no, you have to go learn how to use a Wacom tablet and learn Procreate and Photoshop. Otherwise, you can't make digital art. And so I'm kind of curious, what is your take on sort of how the community is responding to AI art, noting that it's certainly about data, but it's also about like the soullessness, right? A lot of people say if you use text to image to make something in quotes, it's soulless. I'm kind of curious what your response is, to sort of how various groups of artists are reacting.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you asked that because I work really closely with groups of artists. I've worked with the Graphic Artists Guild. This is a really important conversation to me. And I have a lot of empathy for the conversation. And I think I want to start with the things that I think are really valid points. I think the biggest, most valid point is that tech has often deeply mistreated the art industry, left it behind, and used it. And it's an industry where only a small group of people make a lot of money. The majority of artists will not be able to live on their art, something oftentimes they've spent a lot of money going to school for, or will be underpaid for their art. I mean, if you look at resources that like groups like the Graphic Artists Guild have created, the pay rate for artists has barely increased over several decades in comparison to the tech industry, which we know can, up until, all the layoffs recently, it's still a very decent like paying industry, and that's something that I think understandably leaves a little bit of salt in the mouths of artists. I think that the data as well, it's its own conversation, but there's a lot of conversations that can be had about data use outside of Gen AI. Data use is something that we out of sight, out of mind a little bit, and I think this is one of those times where we're actually faced with it and we have to really look at it. And I think that's really intense for people. And I respect what comes up from that. On the flip side, um, I am not at all shy about sharing the fact that I was born with a fine motor learning disability. When I say like put pen to paper, like I was the kid in middle school and elementary school who was in the special education office because I did not have the ability to draw a circle. I spent a lot of time teaching myself how to draw, like an inordinate amount of time, and a lot of time also learning about what it means to have a disability. That in fact, even if you do sort of like muscle your way through and teach yourself how to draw, you're still using so much more energy than those around you who don't have that type of disability, even when you're doing it well and successfully. And so I think that we sometimes the barriers to entry are invisible, and I think that it is unfair to say that Gen AI is somehow emotionless or heartless or soulless. I actually ended up going to school for theater originally, and so this idea of collaborative art, of parts of your art coming from something outside of yourself, being expressed into a more communal space, has never meant that art didn't belong to me in some way. Maybe there's a collaborative aspect. I think, I've talked to a lot of people about this and I've formed my own opinion, but where I've really landed is that I think there are varying degrees within Gen AI art creation within Gen AI that someone can claim ownership over. And I think we need to like look at those degrees to really, get a sense of clarity about what that means. But I think it is wholly inaccurate to say that people don't have ownership, and I'm not talking about copyright, that's a long discussion, but don't have ownership and aren't putting a piece of themselves into art simply because it's made through an AI. There's so many forms of art that use AI technology in them. And so again, I think that it's a really complicated topic, and it's one that we need to spend time pulling apart. And I think the biggest first step as AI artists is to continue to build a movement around it, because a part of building a movement is setting, our own unspoken or very spoken ethical standards. And that's something that the art industry has as well, for better or for worse. I can also unpack the history of the art industry and where that's at, and where that has come from. But nothing is perfect, and we can always improve.
Well said. I think it's certainly a spectrum of how you can create with Gen AI, from text to image, with all these like control net type approaches. And yeah, absolutely. Like it's about the vision in your head and how do you translate that into reality, right? Like as long as you're doing that, that's creative self-expression, and that's really what art is. So I think, Vicky, do you want to close us out on this topic? Because then we want to jump to Microsoft Loop. We'll
Yeah,
loop back
sure.
around to Microsoft now.
Kodakai wanted to
Yeah,
say something too. He finally was able to get the mic set up. But thank you so much, Mint, for
yeah,
what
no
you
worries.
said. I appreciate hearing that, Mint. But go ahead, Vicky.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that's absolutely phenomenal. I think that obviously disabilities that people can't see is one of the biggest heart wrenching things, because there's so many people that have things that you can't see, and I've heard that phrase used before about prompting is soulless. And all I can say from my perspective, who's somebody over 50, is that I've never been able to draw very well. Hence the reason why I took to things like fluid painting and creative things that I self-taught. But the biggest joy I've had in the last year is being able to put my words, and I'm quite good with words and I'm quite good with spelling, but just not good with drawing, to basically put together a story or a sentence and watch it generate before my very eyes. I would say for me personally, it's the furthest from soulless. I just get, it's like an endorphin hit that is like, okay, I've made that from my words, and now what can I make that better, and keep adding to it. And I think that I know artists are scared about it, but I would say if there are any artists that are against it or haven't tried using it, it's an add-on. It really is. It will give you such a creative boost to try it, and just don't be scared about it, because I think that it is coming, and I think it just, if you've got those collaborative skills of photography backgrounds or artist like brushstrokes, you're going to be way ahead of the rest of us using it anyway. But yeah, great chat. I mean,
Thank you, Vicky. I appreciate that. And that is true, because I'm not an artist, and it feels wrong sometimes that I have to pretend in the way I write about creating and things like that, because it's like it doesn't belong to me. But I'm seeing things come to life to that out of my imagination, and it's brought me great joy. So I think it's fair that I should be able to experience that without feeling guilty as if I'm hurting someone else. So in the barrier to entry is, like you said, disability. It could be economic, it could be language, cultural, whatever. And we all need to recognize that in everybody, that we should be more equal, and hopefully people can accept it a little bit better in the future, because it does bring a lot of joy. And I feel like we have to kind of almost hide sometimes how we feel about that. But go ahead, Kai.
Thanks, Heather. I'm really great. It's great to hear that you're making some art and it's bringing you some joy. I think that's really the fundamental motivation of artists, is to bring joy to the world. I actually believe that. We really get paid in people complimenting us. Like it's not necessarily a narcissistic thing, but when you hear someone go, you know what, that picture says something to me, it makes our day. So I'm sure you've had that experience, which is really great. Just a couple of comments, which is we're moving into a future where it's already here. The future is now, where very soon like Bill Gates had that the Bill Gates notes or whatever it's called, where he sees that this is a new GUI or a replacement for the GUI, right? That AI is the new paradigm shift. So just like there was this DOS to GUI-based paradigm that he bet his company on, he's understanding that AI is this new shift, not just simply for productivity and imagination and creativity, whatever, but as a user interface. He understands this, and it's very clear in his notes that that's how he sees it, right? So very soon we're going to be having it so that it can generate GUIs on the fly, just like it'll generate graphs on the fly. It'll generate any design element you want on the fly, right? And so if the most sensible thing is to type something, you'll be able to type something. If the most sensible thing is to press a button will be there, right? And it will be a participatory thing. And this leads to the other thing, which is very soon our interfaces with all AIs will be an AI itself. We'll have our own personal AIs. They will be running on our own personal devices. We already have, so we often get attracted to these big models that these companies are making, which is great. But there's also a lot of efforts for making, tiny but mighty models that are, almost as good as like GPT-3 or 3.5 already, right? And that's already going to be, that's not going to stop. There's going to be, so you've got things like Apple with their mesh networks and their M1 chips and so on. So it's already, even from the big guys, it doesn't have to be like this David and Goliath type scenario where it's the big guys are always the bad guys. No, they'll be contributing to this decentralized push as well as the centralized push. The world's a complicated place, right? So we're going to have our own AIs, and they're going to be under our control, and they're going to be our own sentinels and our own gatekeeped little gardens that we then interact with the messy, complex, scary world that is the wild web. So that was just my comment, is that the interface will be AI, and the interface will include visual and language elements. And as an artist, sometimes I want to describe something, and sometimes I want to basically press a button or play with a knob or play with a slider. And I also think it'll be both. Like sometimes the modern GUIs often have too much complexity in them. You don't know where things are unless you're an expert. So it would just be easier. And how many times do you do this already, where you search for things, right? You actually use search as a way to find elements inside everything. Like on my Mac, I will search to find in settings. I won't look for things in settings. I'll search for it. I do this in pretty much everything. I'll search for things. So I think that even with things like I want to have a slider for adjusting lighting or the camera position, things like that the interface may still be I type it in, which is show me the camera, right? So, because we're thinking in language, that's what we will do. So anyway, moving on to my last point, which is humans are naturally tool users. This is part of our humanity. It goes back to when they've stuck people using tools inside MRI machines, and in a very literal sense, the tool becomes part of the person's body map, right? That doesn't happen with animals, right? Like a tool is an extension of who we are, right? So I think the conversation needs to shift towards what needs to be automated and what needs to be augmented, as opposed to a Luddite conversation, which is we should somehow just not like this and collectively not like this and try to stop it, which is just not going to happen. I don't have to convince anyone in this room that that's just not going to happen. This stuff has got its own momentum, right? You're trying to fight against fate when you're basically trying to do that. So you're not using your free will properly if you're fighting against fate, right? But the proper conversation is what should be augmented and what should be automated. And then that's a complicated question to have. And so as an artist, for example, some things I just want to be automated. I don't want to care about those details. Let the details be handled in an automated way. And other times I want it to be an augmentation of my own free will and my own agency. And I'll pass back the mic on that point.
All right. I think there was a lot of good things to unpack there. Very philosophical, Kai. I think maybe we should have a space at some point that's just all on philosophical topics, because I think a lot of people in here actually care deeply about this.
Yes.
Billawal, do you want to should we try to wrap? I think we've been going for 2 hours now.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I think we probably, it's a good time, but I think we had a great space. Please, by all means, can you guys tie it up? Thank you, everybody who came. And I'm going to let them close out. And please follow along with the people that are in the room. Look at people's profiles, people you might not have encountered outside of this space. And there could be people that you want to follow and just find out more of what they do. There's a lot of very talented people here. We have every sector of Twitter is here. Creators, artists, designers, developers, founders, whatever. We're writers. We're all here. So it's a great place. Please come back and join us next Friday again while we unwind the week, which will sound like it's going to be interesting again. So thank you very much. Look at the newsletters. You guys, please leave any information you have. You can plug yourself in the comments, and people go back through that later, and it'll sit there as a living document, and we can just share information that way. And answer any questions. If you have a answer for somebody's question that we don't have the answer to, please feel free to answer that for them. Appreciate it. But
thank you again for always organizing these awesome spaces. I feel like I'm just like getting together with a bunch of friends, and we're sort of all collectively breathing from, like, drinking from the fire hose of like AI innovation that's happening, and then we're able to distill it down for each other and just help each other sort of navigate like these rising waters. And Kodakai, you also brought it back to, we were talking, and Linus was waxing poetic about disposable apps and adaptive interfaces earlier. So I think we definitely need to do a follow-up on this. We figured after this philosophical note, it probably didn't make sense to go to GitHub Copilot and Microsoft Loop. So it's been 2 hours. We're going to wrap here. I'm going to plug my stuff. I write on creativity, technology, a little bit of culture in the thread after the fact. Let me hand it over to Taylor, Linus, Vicky, anyone on stage, if y'all want to just wrap us out here.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much, everyone, for showing up. I wish we had more time to just hear more people's opinions and thoughts. This is why we're here, and we're trying to do our best in moderating and keeping conversations flowing. I think this is by far the best space that we've had in terms of that and keeping the flow and staying under 2 hours almost.
We
So
barely
yeah.
had to drop you as a hammer, Linus, like fewer times this time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really sorry about that. I mean, I will improve. I'll do better. I'll take the criticism. Good feedback. So I also want to plug myself here. Maybe all of you already know what I'm doing, but I guess my mission is to try to get as many people as possible to know about AI and AI tools and learn the tools. So kind of an evangelist of sorts. I also do write occasionally, like my thoughts and rumbles, and where I think everything is going. So you can just find me here on Twitter, Linus Ekenstam, or my Substack. So yeah, I mean, looking forward to see you guys again next week.
thank you so much. And Taylor, I think she has she's a little bit away for now with her little one, and the newsletters and Substack. Thank you all so much, because I'm at above 2,000 subscribers in 2 weeks. And it's because of this community. Thank you so much for all the support, and I really appreciate it. And we're going to try to provide even more information for you and get more collaboration and interviews, different things with different creators and different people that can contribute to that. I would like to have a gallery set up, a community gallery, because we have so many great images that come up with all of these different threads that we put out, or even just replies. It's just gold to see it. It's such a good feeling to see people that connect that we might not have connected otherwise. So I really appreciate it. And please subscribe to my newsletter if you see it. I appreciate that. We're just going to keep growing and show people how we can make this move. Vicky, did you had your hand up? Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add as well is that we've started doing 11 a.m. on Eastern time, Monday to Friday, just an hour's space. There's me, there's Sarah, you can see down below, Randall, that chop it up every day. There's obviously something going on, but obviously anyone's welcome, and the more the merrier, really, as things are moving pretty fast. But I'd love you to all come along and give your views and say, come and chat.
That's a good point, Vicky. Thank you so much, because there's so many spaces that are going on all the time. Pharmapsychotic is here, I see, and I know that you have I think it might be daily, correct? There's a lot of different spaces that are happening, so just jump into those, and when you see that, go ahead and like add to it, because sometimes there may not be, people won't know it's happening. A lot of time I just happen to see, oh, wait a minute, they're having a space right now. So just, everybody contribute, and everybody's welcome. Thank you all for coming in. We have so many people here. It's like I can see people. Rose, Zoish, thank you so much for coming. Haven't seen you for a while. Thank you so much. Marcos here, Pharmapsychotic, Fidgetal, and Batik. Thank you for joining us from down under. Richard, Andrew with a fabulous app, the Genia app. You guys please use that for Midjourney and check it out and see. That's a free app that has it expands your prompts and it's very good. Dreambox is here, and they're actually creating physical products now from the AI art that people are creating. So Dreambox is ready to start shipping things out. Make sure you follow along with them. And they're also working with the artist community and the creator, not just artists, but any types of people that can put together these vertical products in different things. So, sewing, tailors, metalwork, sculptors, whatever. Sarah, I see you there. And just there's so many people, and I apologize if I didn't call your name. Jordan, I see you down there. Thank you guys. Simon, appreciate it. I know you got awesome screenshots for us. You always take care of that for us because I always forget about that. But thank you all so much. And we'll see you next Friday. Have a great weekend and get ready for another week of wild news.
Bye.
Bye.